Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of 2015's Fantastic Four. Ahead of the homecoming of Marvel's first family in the MCU in 2025, we are going back to look at the legacy of Fantastic Four film adaptations. This film, directed by Josh Trank, known for 2012's Chronicle, this Fanforstic film was a darker, bleaker turn that Kevin Feige, who is not an executive producer on this film, can derive mostly lessons of what not to do. And for that reason alone, the 2015 Fantastic Four film is totally worth revisiting and properly breaking down as a relic from a time when superhero cinema nearly skewed onto a very dark path. It is truly fascinating to rewatch this film to see how a very promising cast, including the future MCU Killmonger just 3 years after this, could be misled by forces following the wrong principles and ultimately caving under pressure. The film opens with the 20th Century Fox fanfare, and in our X-Men rewatch series, we pointed out every time the X lingered on the fade to black, but here the F is what lingers, and the F stands for F you, Fantastic Four fans, because this movie is not interested in their comic book spirit whatsoever. So this film was directed by Josh Trank, and Josh Trank got this gig to direct this movie when he was just turning 30. After a start directing a viral YouTube video and Spike TV webisodes, Trank collaborated with Jeremy Slater, who would later become head writer for Moon Knight, on a spec script about Portland teens who discover superpowers and takes a dark turn, a script that became what we know as Chronicle. Slater left this project, and Trank reached out to Max Landis to co-write it. Landis's draft of Chronicle landed on the blacklist of promising unproduced screenplays in 2010. And since Franklin Linder's blacklist was just like 5 years into it, this is the time when the industry still gave a shit about this kind of thing. So Trank and Landis ended up selling Chronicle to Fox, but Landis left the project when Fox was unhappy with its latest draft, and yet with a cast of talented upstarts including Dane DeHaan and Michael B. Jordan, and on a shoestring found footage budget of just $15 million, Chronicle grossed $127 million, and Josh Trank was suddenly hot shit. It was announced that he would be directing a standalone Boba Fett film, and he was given this 2015 Fantastic Four reboot. Now, Fox had to make a new Fantastic Four film by 2015 or the rights to the characters would revert to Marvel. Development on a past version of a reboot stalled in 2009, and by 2013, with the deadline quickly approaching, Fox was looking for a young filmmaker who could work for cheap and define an alternative tone to the saccharine, Disneyfied MCU. And with Chronicle, Josh Trank was that guy. He brought an edge, and his film asked questions like, what if superpowers were horrifyingly real and reflected our darkest selves? And at the time, you could imagine a Fox executive remembering David Fincher's Seven and thinking, ooh, we should put the 4 in the word of our title and we'll capture that same sexy grit. So, partnered with co-writers Jeremy Slater, coming back, and Fox's Marvel go-to writer-producer Simon Kinberg, Josh Trank ended up making this Fantastic Four film with the bleakness and violence that he brought to Chronicle, which ended up creating a tonal mismatch that led to an extremely messy and combative creative process, where Josh Trank had major conflicts with the cast and with the studio that spilled out into the public. We'll get into more of that in a bit, but let's move on to the movie itself. We open in 2007 in Oyster Bay, New York. A young Reed Richards is played by Owen Judge in a class taught by a very dismissive Mr. Kinney, played by Dan Castellaneta, voice of Homer Simpson and several other Simpsons characters. We see a photo of George W. Bush on the wall, and it is fall 2007, which would be the season Eli Manning led the Giants to a Super Bowl win, so it makes sense that the kid before Reed says that he wants to play quarterback for the New York Giants like Eli Manning. Notice how the makeup department added these subtle little scars to this young actor's cheek and his chin, I suppose to better match the scars on Miles Teller's face, even though Miles Teller got those scars in a car accident when he was 20. Reed says,
when I grow up, I want to be the first person in human history to teleport himself.
We are already seeing a divergence from the spirit of the Fantastic Four comics. This Reed is not an aspiring space explorer, he just wants to teleport, an aspect that Josh Trank reportedly got from the David Cronenberg horror film The Fly, which this movie has much more in common with than really any other superhero film. Mr. Kenny mocks,
is it next to your flying car?
Yes, a reference to the Fantastic Car, the Fantastic Four's flying car from the comics, a version of which showed up in the 2007 Silver Surfer film and was originally going to appear in this film. There were concept art renderings of a car made out of a Winnebago and other models from the Grimm family scrapyard. Johnny and Reed would have built this car together, and the plan was for them to equip it with a quantum gate so that they could follow Richter to Planet Zero that way. That idea was scrapped because of ballooning production costs, as was a version of the robot Herbie, the Fantastic Four's robot assistant, who would have rolled around on a cool soccer ball, but he was was cut because producers didn't want to be too similar to Iron Man's Jarvis, but Herbie will appear in the 2025 Fantastic Four film. But Reed responds to his teacher saying he's not working on building a flying car anymore and has instead moved on to building what he calls the biomatter shuttle. Only a young Ben Grimm, played by Evan Hannerman, doesn't join the class in mocking Reed. And the fact that this film opens with like a representative of academia making fun of a kid for being too much of a nerd just kind of tells you what kind of world this is set in. Now in the comics, Ben Grimm grew up on the fictional Yancey Street in Manhattan, but here it's the Grimm Salvage Yard in Oyster Bay on Long Island. His brother Jimmy is played by Chet Hanks, he of the White Boy Summer and son of Tom. In the comics, Ben's brother was named Daniel and he was killed in a Yancey Street gang fight. Jack Kirby actually modeled the character of Ben after himself. Kirby, like Grimm, was Jewish and grew up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan on Delancey Street, and his older brother died when he was young. But all we really get of Ben's Jewish roots is just a very subtle menorah on the shelf inside of the home. But there's also a spaceship toy in the background, which I was hoping might be a nod to the Fantastic Four's comic origins as astronauts. We see the Grimms are watching UVA versus Connecticut on ESPN, which could be the game from October 13th, 2007, when UConn lost by 1 point. Now, before Jimmy beats his little brother, he says,
"Clobbering time."
Oh my God. The fact that this movie takes the Thing's iconic catchphrase and assigns it to childhood trauma of abuse makes it one of the most unforgivable aspects of this film. And that's saying something. But then we learn Jimmy is abused by their mother, so the cycle goes back and back. Ugh. Ben catches Reed looking for a power converter in the yard. Boys end up going back to Reed's garage, which is actually the same set where Biff keeps his car in Back to the Future Part 2. Reed's stepdad is played by comedian Tim Heidecker, who has a cameo in 2018's Ant-Man and the Wasp. He has only one line here, but the fact that they made him his stepfather and not his biological father may have been to set up the character of Nathaniel Richards, who in the comics would end up leaving Reed behind as he traveled through time. Like maybe there was like a planned sequel where we would have explored Reed's true father. Reed's biomatter shuttle is built out of a bunch of old Nintendo 64s. You could even see a green controller at one point. They transport a green Matchbox car and is replaced with a pile of rocks. 7 years later, it's 2014, and we are at a science fair where Reed is played by Miles Teller, who at this point in his career was coming off of a huge year after Whiplash. And Ben is played by Jamie Bell, who as a child actor had broke out in the 2000 Billy Elliot film. Yes, the same role whose stage version gave us Tom Holland. So it is kind of interesting that these actors look alike. But Jamie Bell at this point in his career was a rising star for movies like Snowpiercer and Nymphomaniac. Reed and Ben borrow a Cessna model plane for the Cymatic Matter shuttle, but Mr. Kinney, who hunts these kids from elementary school to high school like Mr. Feeney, disqualifies Reed's science for being magic. But two people who are impressed are Dr. Franklin Storm, played by The Wire and House of Cards' Reg E. Carthay, and his adopted daughter Sue Storm, played by Kate Mara, also from House of Cards and a number of other roles. We later learn that Sue was adopted by Franklin from Kosovo. So Jamie Bell and Kate Mara hated working on this film, but they did end up falling in love on the press tour and they eventually got married. So that's one good thing to come out of it. In the comics, Franklin Storm was a renowned surgeon who gave up medicine after failing to save his wife's life after a car crash, and Reed and Sue will go on to name their son after him, Franklin Richards. But this movie does not really develop any kind of romantic chemistry between Reed and Sue. That's just not what this movie's about. We learn that Franklin and Sue have been working on a teleporter of their own, and Franklin offers Reed a scholarship to the Baxter Foundation. While the foundation got its name for the Baxter Building, the recurring headquarters of the Fantastic Four, in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, they used the term Baxter Foundation to describe Reed Richards' organization in the 838 universe. Ben helps Reed move into the Baxter Building in Manhattan, and Reed observes this trophy case, where there's an article with the headline, "Baxter Researcher Proves Existence of Dark Matter, Will Help Scientists Determine the Origin of the Universe." Also, Baxter Institute develops first quad series super microchip. There's an award with the engraving Coalition of Genetic Engineers Research Laboratory of the Year. There's a Frame magazine reading New Revolutions in Science 1993, special report Baxter Institute leading the way in something, and that Best of 1993 robot hand on the magazine cover might be a prototype of Herbie. Reed chats with Susan Storm at the library, and she's listening to Roads by Portishead, and he assumes that she has never heard of the famous novel Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is his favorite book because he wants to be an explorer. Tim Blake Nelson plays Dr. Harvey Allen, who represents the government board that funds the Baxter Foundation. In the original script, his character was named Harvey Elder, aka Mole Man, the first villain the Fantastic Four ever faced. This film actually comes out right in between Nelson's appearances as Samuel Stearns, the leader in the 2008 Incredible Hulk film, and when he will reprise the role in 2025's Captain America Brave New World. We meet this movie's Victor Von Doom, played by Toby Kebbell. When Franklin visits him, you see that he uses an eyepiece to non-verbally open the door and then close the blinds, which seems to foreshadow his future as a telekinetic techno-organic hybrid. And we see directly behind him is the Latvian flag, his home country in the comics. And on one of its monitors is 2015's Ubisoft Assassin's Creed Syndicate. On the Assassin's Creed Syndicate video game Easter egg, supposedly the Assassin's Creed film, which is also released by Fox, was supposed to come out on August 7th, 2025, but this Fantastic Four film wound up getting that release date instead, and Assassin's Creed got pushed to December of 2016. Sorry, Michael Fassbender. So Victor agrees to come back on board the project and all the meet in this fancy lab. Now, if you look at the scene closely, Kate Mara's hair switches from her actual hair to a super obvious blonde wig, and you can kind of tell how Miles Teller's facial hair just kind of changes shot to shot. This was because Fox demanded significant reshoots in January 2015 after being displeased with Josh Trank's earlier cut of the film, and Miles Teller was just so fed up with working on this movie he refused to shave. Meanwhile, Josh Trank was so frustrated with the studio and all of its revisions that one day before this film release, he tweeted and then quickly deleted, quote, "A year ago I had a fantastic version of this and it would have received great reviews. You'll probably never see it. That's reality though." Yikes. So we see how a drone sent through the portal sends back images from the new world. The screen shows the planet name Earth Zero, codenamed EZO. Now in the original script, this is going to be the Negative Zone, the antimatter universe from the comics that existed parallel to Earth. In an earlier script draft, Galactus would have arrived in the Negative Zone and destroyed the civilization there. This was all reworked during the reshoots, and this dimension was renamed Earth Zero or Planet Zero. Victor describes this planet.
New energy, resources. It's a whole new world.
Which can help save this one.
Victor argues with Franklin, saying that Earth doesn't deserve to be saved after how badly those running it messed it up, so it deserves what it gets. And Sue sarcastically christens him with his comics moniker for this attitude.
Dr. Doom over here.
So then we meet this movie's Johnny Storm, played by Michael B. Jordan. And yes, isn't it ironic that both the 2005 and 2007 Fantastic Four films, Johnny Storm, Chris Evans, and this film's Johnny Storm, Michael B. Jordan, both went on to have more fruitful careers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's in a drag race, and hanging from his rearview mirror is a fire flower from Super Mario Bros., which gives Mario the power to throw fireballs and melt things in the games, just like Johnny will be able to do in this movie. He ends up breaking his arm, and this emergency room is the Judith Trank Memorial Hospital. Judith Trank is Josh Trank's stepmother. Franklin refuses to give Johnny's car back unless he goes back to work with him and the others. The group ends up completing a successful test with a chimpanzee, and Harvey says that the next step is to coordinate with NASA. And for a moment we feel, hey, great, now we finally get to meet the true Fantastic Four as bright, optimistic astronauts that they are in the comics, instead of these dour, interdimensional travel scientists. But no, these are the ones we stick with. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. It's spring, and while for a lot of us that means doing a deep cleaning of our apartment, there's no reason you can't do the same thing with your brain. Whether you're looking to begin or continue your journey with mental health, BetterHelp can help you connect to a therapist who's right for you. BetterHelp makes starting therapy easier and less intimidating for a lot of people. First, use our link to go to their site, BetterHelp.com/newrockstars. The site will ask you to answer a few questions so BetterHelp can match you up with one of their over 30,000 therapists who they think will help you out the most. The therapist they pick for you will have tons of experience dealing with whatever you're going through. Every single one of their therapists is licensed, has a master's or doctorate degree, and has spent over 3 years and 1,000 hours working with people just like you. You'll be matched to a therapist usually within 48 hours so you can get started fast. We've been promoting BetterHelp for a while, and we've heard some amazing feedback from you guys. We got permission to share this review from one of our viewers who said, "I used to be against the idea of therapy and I didn't need it. After one session with my therapist, I completely pivoted and realized how beneficial therapy truly is." Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your home. Visit BetterHelp.com/newrockstars or choose New Rockstars during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. And Victor talks some major shit about NASA.
Well, hey, why just NASA? Why not the Army or the CIA? We could send our political prisoners there. Waterboarding in the fourth dimension could prove very effective.
So, in addition to this movie constantly dissing the Marvel Comics legacy that the Fantastic Four come from, it also seems to liken NASA with CIA torture. Now, yes, it is coming from Victor, and he's kind of an asshole, but it kind of feels like this section of the movie validates his point of view. And then he tells the others that history only remembers the astronaut pilots like Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, not the engineers who built the tech, despite movies like Apollo 13 celebrating the teamwork between the pilots and the engineers. And this same year of 2015, the long-awaited film The Martian released, also co-starring Kate Mara, and celebrated a pro-NASA, thoughtful, collaborative approach to crisis management. Mark Watney and everyone in The Martian apply critical thinking, and that film triumphs logic. This film, by contrast, coming out in the same year, 2015, does not show any actual work to demonstrate why Reed Richards is the smartest man alive. He just is in this movie. So these boys get drunk and decide to do their own thing, and they do not invite Sue. Why not? Instead, Reed's like, hey, let me call my junkyard buddy to go on this experimental trip with us. But the white environment suits that the guys wear, which were designed and tested by Sue, are based on the Fantastic Four's Future Foundation uniforms. And it's just crazy to think that at this point in 2015, we're getting some of the best Fantastic Four comic writing by people like Jonathan Hickman, including everything that happened with the Future Foundation leading up to Secret Wars. And just the fact that this movie's like not interested in adapting any of that, even thematically, it's just like unforgivable, because the biggest fans of the Fantastic Four were eaten so good from the comics literature that when they walked into this movie, they were like, why would you shit on the Fantastic Four? You have no idea how good these characters could be. So the guys activate the quantum gate and Reed repeats,
don't blow up. Please don't blow up.
just like he did when he was a kid.
Don't blow up. Don't blow up.
And then they cross over into Earth Zero. Now, in the OG comics, Reed, Sue, Ben, and Johnny hijack a rocket so that they would be the first humans in space, and they were exposed to cosmic radiation while on that rocket, and Doom, meanwhile, was accidentally disfigured in an unrelated lab accident. But kind of like the 2005 film, this story here has all 5 of them getting mutated by the same lab experiment gone wrong. In this case, it involves a portal to another dimension that is based on the Fantastic Four's ultimate Marvel origin. And when the guys first see this planet, it's very dark, there's swirling clouds overhead, a rocky surface. Josh Trank actually wanted to connect this planet to his film Chronicle, like to make it part of the same universe. And the studio was like, no, but Josh Trank did it anyway. And he said at a panel that the crystals on Earth Zero are purposefully similar to the crystal you see in Chronicle. Victor says,
I made it.
Yes, he says, I made it, not we made it. When Reed and Ben try to plant the American flag, the pole fissures the ground to reveal the green glow beneath the surface. As they climb down to the convergence point, the source of it, there's this cool effect as they walk on the surface where each step they take kind of squishes at the ground a bit, like kind of like it's like muddy sitting atop a more fluid layer. And Victor says,
it's responding to physical stimulus, almost like a nerve impulse. I can feel it, the energy, it's alive.
And then that green energy geysers up, and after Victor had triggered it by touching it, a tendril of it seems to select him and drag him down. So this really comes from an earlier script draft where this glow would have represented the antimatter left over from Galactus's destruction of this world, and Galactus would have used it to seemingly kill Victor, but in reality turn him into a herald of Galactus, followed by Doom going back to Latveria and taking over the country with his new powers. I think this is what Josh Trank was referring to by a better version of this movie existing in his tweet. But you know, more plot doesn't necessarily mean better if the director is so totally misaligned with the IP. Like sure, a possibly sentient extra-dimensional threat could have been very interesting to explore in this movie, but I think only this movie had a Fantastic Four film that was worthy enough of fighting for. As Sue manually overrides the system to bring them back, the other 3 get blasted in ways that reflect their powers. The window cracks in front of Johnny and he's bombarded by fiery flames. Ben is pelted with rocks. Reed was infected when he was stretching for Victor to try to keep him from falling. And as they blast back into the lab, Sue is hit by a kind of shockwave and she blinks in and out of visibility. Their re-entry blacks out the city, just like Reed did with his experiment when he was younger. When Reed comes to, he's basically in a horror film. He sees Johnny just on fire. Ben is screaming out for help, buried under rocks, but those rocks are actually his body now. And we see that Reed's leg is hideously stretched out and then he faints. So they're brought to Area 57, location classified, which of course is a nod to Area 51, the Air Force facility in Nevada. But this movie got tax breaks by shooting in Louisiana and Vancouver, so they needed a new base that matched that Canadian terrain. But when they were shooting in Louisiana, reportedly Josh Trank brought his 3 dogs with him to a rental home in Baton Rouge that did $100,000 in damage to that home. Though we do have to acknowledge that there was a vast and vicious blame game in the press between Trank and the studio. You can look up and find all kinds of like reporting of what it was like working with Josh Trank on the set. Apparently him and Miles Teller almost got in a fist fight. He was told he wasn't allowed to go in actors' dressing rooms to give them notes at some point. Kate Mara described working with him as horrible. Even Josh Trank has said that he had anger issues while he was working on this production. So here we see Reed splayed out on a table under observation with his limbs stretched out. Moving his fingers seems to elicit pain. And one thing to notice about this part of this movie is there is no joy here. It's kind of presented as a horrifying curse, something painful. Same with Sue's invisibility, Johnny's inflammation. It's like we're watching a horror film. And it just feels weird to be watching a Fantastic Four movie like that. Hearing Ben's cries for help motivates Reed to escape from his restraints. He stretches through the vents to get to Ben. And again, just moving seems to be super painful for this pile of rocks.
Reed, please,
And we see how Ben pries a chunk of rock to reach for his friend, forming his rock hand for the first time. So this is the first time they did a non-prosthetic, non-practical suit version of the thing. It's totally CGI, and we do have to admit the texturing looks pretty good. Otoy, the visual effects company who did this, claimed that dealing with an increasingly erratic and unresponsive Trank made it hard to finish these designs. Trank apparently wanted the thing's size and shape to shift between shots. A bunch of shots ended up getting nixed from the final cut because the company just didn't have enough time or money to make them work. But the effects of the core four and their powers did end up looking pretty realistic, at least more realistic than any of the other Fantastic Four films to date. And I think that's just credit to the visual effects artists who worked on it. So Reed escapes Area 57, and Harvey promises Ben that they can help cure him if he works for the government. Bringing us 1 year later, and we see Ben has become a government instrument. He dismantles a tank, recalling the shots of Ang Lee's 2003 Hulk. The Thing in this movie does not wear shorts or clothes of any kind, and it is unsettling. They did include this line from Harvey.
We developed suits which allow them to contain and control these conditions.
The idea was that Ben Grimm doesn't need to control his condition in the same way that Johnny or Sue do, and thus does not need a suit. Okay. Harvey shows how Johnny can now hurl fireballs, and Sue can make other items invisible and produce force fields, and Harvey wants to send more soldiers to Planet Zero to turn into super soldiers the same way with the new quantum gate. And I just love the detail that Tim Blake Nelson made the choice of just chewing gum for the second half of this movie. He's just always like, and all of his shots, that just makes him look like kind of a douchebag. So Johnny, now embracing his life as a government instrument as a Human Torch, takes out several drones. He's capable of flying 2 kilometers in 6 seconds. And notice how they designed Michael B. Jordan's suit with these little grill bars on his chest and on his hands to make it look like his self-produced flame had kind of tracks on which to burn, kind of like his suit is a propane grill. But those chest bars form the shape of 4 hash marks, making it a kind of Fantastic Four emblem in a way. Sue has mastered her ability to use a force field to levitate, something that was not part of Susan Storm's powers initially in the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby era, but eventually did become part of her power set later on. These two siblings disagree.
I am not going to be a tool. Johnny.
Flame on.
Flame on, the catchphrase. Again, kind of misused because there's none of the joy that the catchphrase is supposed to come with. And that's not Michael B. Jordan's fault. It's clear Josh Trank just didn't really know what to do with the trappings of these comic book characters, but felt compelled to include these catchphrases to just kind of check the boxes, because otherwise it wouldn't look like a Fantastic Four movie at all. Hey, say what you will about Tim's story, but at least he allowed Chris Evans to embrace this aspect of the character. Flame on! Ben watches an after-action report of his last mission, and the screen reads, confirmed kills 43. Yikes! This guy's a hero? Sue searches the CIA/NSA blips of Reed to find the pattern, calling back her very important conversation with Reed in the library, in which people, like music, are really just patterns. Now, I would think a more thoughtful take about human nature is the way we break our own patterns, but here is Sue Storm giving the NSA a new tool with which to track American citizens. On the monitor, there are several news items about Ben, including one with a drawing of him with the headline, New Sketch of Rock Monster Release, another with Rock Monster Spotted Again, and the third reading, Rebels Say Attacked by Rock-like Creature. And I think this comes from a deleted scene that crew members talked about from this movie, in which Ben would have brutalized a whole bunch of Chechen rebels. So Sue finds Reed through the email relay CPT-N3M0, or Captain Nemo, which was the main character in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the book that they talked about before. So we find Reed in Panama, I think, stretching his face to change his facial features as he salvages parts, and also speaks perfect Spanish. I gotta say, it is a little weird that he is stretching his face to become Panamanian or some other Central American or South American nationality. I don't have time to get into the politics of that. But we see how Reed is wearing a self-made suit with visible cables and telescoping joints, which would allow him to stretch his arms without tearing the fabric. He's trying to rebuild his own quantum gate, and he pulls up a dossier of Ben from the Military Threat Response Agency, which lists Ben's weight as 545 pounds and his birth date as March 14th, 1986, which must be a mistake for this movie's timeline, because in 2007, Ben and Reed were in 5th grade, and in 2014 they were high school seniors, so he would at earliest need to be born in 1996. But you know what? Look, there was a lot of chaos in the making of this film. I'm not surprised that this was overlooked. But taped to Reed's wall is a photo of him and Ben when they were kids, along with a map and some more articles, including ones with the headlines, Sighted Again, Creature Spotted in Middle East, and Bigfoot is Real and Angry, and then a couple in Spanish that translate to The Creature Caught on Camera and Terror Attacks Slovakia. So the military ambushes Reed, and I'm pretty sure that Miles Teller was shot on a green screen screen with a plate for this scene, because look at him in relation to his background, especially when it moves. That looks pretty artificial, right? The stunt work of his stretchy body to take out the soldiers is actually pretty impressively choreographed, but Teller just seems to be so artificially inserted in the setting that would just be a simple controlled outdoor set in Louisiana. I don't know why this would be so hard, but I just assume this is another day where Miles Teller just did not want to be on the set with Trank. Maybe it was part of the reshoots and he was just reluctant to show up. So this fight ends with the Thing headbutting Reed to knock him out, and he takes them back. And in the second half of the movie, we do get some interesting character beats between the team members where they kind of talk through their guilt that they feel towards each other and what happened, but they're just so sad in this movie. And it's nice for them to take responsibility for the ways they betrayed each other. But notice how it's all things that the characters just did to each other in the second half of the film. And even the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Captain Nemo thing, Sue's betrayal of Reed just feels like it was inserted artificially back in the first act of the film. It doesn't feel like a natural outgrowth of who these people are as characters. And it's also something that doesn't really get resolved by their actions in the final battle of the film. This film just kind of feels like a patchwork of different short films that are just kind of jammed together. But Reed gets a look at the Quantum Gate 2's source code and he fixes it in less than 10 minutes because he's a genius, because this movie just tells us he's a genius. They oversee this new group transferring to Planet Zero.
The landscape's changed.
How?
I don't know, it's just different.
Yes, the lack of the green glow is likely because all that energy would have flowed into Victor to empower him. And Victor is back. He appears hooded, I suppose, to make him look the most like Dr. Doom's comic appearance. And he limps up, pulling a Willy Wonka to trick them into thinking he's injured, to bringing him back through the quantum gate. And we see that that environment suit has now fused to his skin, which now looks like the cracked surface of the planet when they first saw it. Victor turns on Harvey.
If this world must die, so that mine may live, so be it.
And then Victor activates some psionic powers and he does this. It is pretty shocking that this made it into a PG-13 film, considering Victor exploded a body from the inside. But I think that Harvey's knelt posture and the lack of the color red on the inside of his hood visor helped the MPAA look past this. And what follows is what I consider to be this movie's one pretty good sequence. Victor marches through the hall on a massacre. Jesus Christ, those are heads smashing, but the blood is desaturated enough and the moment of impact occurs when the overhead lights flicker out, so we don't really see it. And while we don't need the Fantastic Four's powers to be depicted as a horror show, I will admit that it's pretty cool to see a Marvel villain go this hard. Like, we've talked a lot of shit about Josh Trank in this video, but you can see that the guy was capable of doing this type of story. It's what made Chronicle as good as it was. So Victor kills Franklin, but since Franklin's not in a suit for this shot, he just kind of zaps him, and that's as violent as they're able to be. Victor hijacks the quantum gate and throws a hood over his head to complete his Dr. Doom look. And he activates a portal to suck Earth's resources into Earth Zero to build his new world. Visually, this does create yet another beam of light into the sky, final battle that critics and viewers of superhero movies were growing weary of at this point. Sue forms a force field around herself and the other three so that they can go on into Earth Zero. Johnny charges at Doom first, and then Ben, and then Sue. But notice how Doom thwarts each of them essentially just by sticking a bunch of rocks to them. So Reed tries to talk.
Victor, don't do this!
There is no Victor. There is only Doom.
Yeah, there is a little, there is no Dana, only Joule, Ghostbusters in that. But with the four of them pinned, Reed finds himself back in that horror moment of when they each first got their powers. But this time he chooses not to run or to freak out. He flings Doom into the chasm and gives them just enough time to regroup with some of Franklin's departing wisdom.
We can't beat him. He's stronger than any of us.
Yeah, he is. But he's not stronger than all of us.
And then we get some solid teamwork here, specifically the sibling combo where Johnny hurls fireballs and Sue uses her force field to encase one of the fireballs so Victor cannot disperse it. And then when it hits him, she contains Victor in that bubble with the fire for as long as she can. And then while Reed distracts Doom, we get the big finish.
Always so smug, thinking you were smarter than me.
I am smarter than you.
It's clobbering time!
It's clobbering time works. Sue made Ben invisible right up until the last moment, and with Doom caught in the beam, Johnny 9/11s through the pillars to disintegrate Doom. So later on, with their meeting with military leaders, there is a spread of pastries on the conference table, and I like that Johnny has started to eat a croissant. So the government agrees to set them up.
We've been operating out of here for over 12 years now, well, officially that is. But you still won't find our name on any government books. Most people just refer to this as Central City.
So in the comics, Central City in California was the original home base of the Fantastic Four. In the DC comics, Central City is where Barry Allen / the Flash lives, and that one is arguably better known. That might explain why other Fantastic Four films don't really mention it. Johnny wants to name this building the Franklin Storm Research Center, but Sue isn't so sure her dad would want his names in big letters like that. And Reed says that since they're a team, they need their own name.
The Human Torch and the Torchettes.
They nix that name, but Johnny pitches another.
How about two guys, a girl, and the thing that nobody wanted?
Yeah, it kind of seems like he's using the cadence of the 1998 Ryan Reynolds series Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place, but I believe this might have been the only time in this movie where Ben is referred to as Thing in dialogue. But Ben finally says the magic words.
It's fantastic.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Yes, it is. Guys, I got it. Ready?
Yeah.
So a few months before this, Joss Whedon ended Avengers Age of Ultron with another similar cut to black moment.
Avengers!
So this Fantastic Four film flopped thanks to negative fan reaction from the trailers, bad word of mouth, reports of the reshoots and on-set chaos, and Trank's tweet the day before the release. And box office analysts have said that tweet may have cost the studio $5 to $10 million in opening weekend box office. We're not really sure if it had that much impact, but it definitely didn't help. This movie ultimately made only $56 million domestic, a worldwide total of $168 million, but on a budget of $120 million, which was a massive disappointment for a film that played on 4,000 screens. The impact of this film would be felt in a lot of ways. It was reportedly what got Miles Teller dropped from Damien Chazelle's next feature, A La La Land, but good thing because it did give us Ryan Gosling in that role. Josh Trank's Boba Fett movie deal fizzled after Disney had bought Lucasfilm. Marvel Comics was so unhappy with the direction of this movie that in The Punisher Volume 10, number 12, the Fantastic Four were drawn to look like the cast of this movie and then were killed in an explosion. Stan Lee refused to appear in a cameo for this movie, though reportedly he did write Josh Trank a letter asking if he was okay, because, you know, back during this time, Josh Trank on Twitter was all over the place. So really, Fox as a studio biffing a flagship Marvel franchise made it easier for Disney in 2018 to approach the shareholders of Fox with a buyout of Fox's film and TV properties that they could not deny, leading to where we are now, the Fantastic Four in the MCU. So what lessons can Kevin Feige and Matt Shakman take as they approach that adaptation? Well, one, Fantastic Four superpowers should bring us joy, not horror. There are superhero franchises where the power is more of a curse, like what Jeremy Slater ended up doing with Moon Knight, and that's perfectly okay to explore, but that's not what the Fantastic Four are about. Next, Reed Richards should look to the stars, not in a computer screen. Like the astronauts and engineers in NASA's history, Reed Richards is the smartest man alive because of what he builds and how he solves problems with collaboration and practical workarounds and critical thinking, and not just by smugly staring at a computer screen and telling everyone to go away while he decodes something super fast. Next, Marvel movies should celebrate their comic legacy, not roll their eyes at it. We know this. And then finally, superhero movie audiences want escapism and hope, not cruelty and fear. This is something other non-Marvel studios experimented with during these years in the 2010s, and they all came up short because you don't need to do the opposite of Marvel. Marvel didn't even know fully what it was doing at that time. Just tell good stories and honor the spirit of the comics. That doesn't mean you can't have violence. Daredevil proved that you can have extreme violence, but you still have to leave audiences with a sense of hope for a better world. Because one thing that all good superhero stories have in common is that they believe that the world, at the end of the day, is worth fighting for. Honestly, the bar has been set so low for live action Fantastic Four films that if Marvel Studios just sticks to these basics, it's really a guaranteed hit. Their only real competition from the past, I believe, is Pixar's The Incredibles, which Brad Bird arguably made to be a Fantastic Four movie just with a different name. And we will break down Pixar's The Incredibles in the near future as kind of a bonus to this rewatch series. Comment down below with your thoughts on this film. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels in the new Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.